Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, I've got a chilling story called The Hollow's Whisper. It follows Jacob Turner, a man seeking peace in the remote Ozark Mountains, only to find himself haunted by eerie whispers and a shadowy presence tied to a dark past. As he unravels the mystery, the line between reality and nightmare blurs. So grab a blanket, dim the lights, and let's dive into the unsettling quiet of the hollow. The gravel crunched under Jacob Turner's truck tires as he pulled up to the cabin, the late September sun dipping behind the Ozark Mountains. He was 47, broad-shouldered from years of carpentry, but the lines on his face told a story of grief heavier than any hammer he'd swung. His wife Clara had passed 2 years ago, cancer quick and merciless. The city of Little Rock had started to feel like a cage, every street corner a reminder of her laugh, her touch. So when his uncle left him this cabin in the will, tucked deep in the hills near Jasper, Arkansas, Jacob saw it as a chance to start over, or at least to stop hurting so damn much. The cabin sat on 5 acres, surrounded by dense pines and oaks, the nearest neighbor a good mile down the winding dirt road. It was the kind of quiet he thought he needed. The place was old, built in the 1940s, with weathered logs and a sagging porch. The windows were cloudy with age, and the front door groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. Jacob stepped inside his boots, echoing on the hardwood floor. The air smelled of dust and cedar, with a faint metallic tang he couldn't place. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, its mantel bare except for a single cracked photo frame empty. The furniture was sparse, a worn couch, a rickety table, a couple of chairs that looked one sit away from collapsing. Upstairs, a narrow hallway led to 2 bedrooms, one with a lumpy mattress and a rusty bed frame, the other empty, save for a warped dresser. It wasn't much, but it was his. Jacob spent the first day unloading boxes, mostly tools, clothes, and a few books Clara used to read. He didn't bring much else. Memories were too heavy to carry. By evening he was bone-tired, his hands aching from hauling. He cracked open a beer and sat on the porch watching the sky turn purple. The silence was thick, broken only by the rustle of leaves and a distant coyote's howl. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of peace. Maybe this place could be home. That night he lay in bed, the mattress creaking under his weight. The cabin was colder than he'd expected, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones. He pulled the blanket tighter, staring at the ceiling's exposed beams. Sleep was just starting to take him when he heard it, a low, breathy sound like someone exhaling sharply. It came from outside, faint but deliberate, somewhere beyond the bedroom window. Jacob sat up, heart thudding. He waited, straining his ears. There it was again, sharper this time, almost like a word, but too soft to make out. He swung his legs over the bed, the floorboards groaning underfoot, and peered through the window. The glass was warped, distorting the moonlit trees outside. Nothing moved. Just the wind, he told himself, though the air was still. He lay back down, but the sound kept coming irregular, like someone pacing the perimeter of the house, muttering under their breath. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, but it had a rhythm, a cadence that felt alive. Jacob's pulse quickened. He'd lived in the city too long. Maybe this was just the forest settling, animals or branches rubbing together. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, until it seemed to press against the walls. He got up again, this time grabbing the flashlight from his bag. The beam cut through the dark as he checked every window, every door. All locked. Outside, the yard was empty, the trees swaying gently. No tracks, no signs of anyone. Just that damn sound, fading now, like it knew he was looking. Back in bed, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He left the bedside lamp on its weak glow, casting shadows that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it was fitful, filled with dreams of Clara standing in the woods, her face pale, her lips moving, but no sound coming out. He woke at dawn, sweaty. Despite the cold, the echo of that breathy whisper still in his ears. The next day, Jacob threw himself into fixing up the cabin. He sanded the porch, patched a leak in the roof, anything to keep his hands busy. But the unease lingered a weight in his chest he couldn't shake. He found himself glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see someone at the edge of the trees. By afternoon, he drove into Jasper to pick up supplies, nails a new lock for the front door, and a cheap radio to fill the silence. The clerk at the hardware store, an old man with a gray beard, gave him a long look when he mentioned the cabin's location. "That's the old Harper place, ain't it?" the man said, scratching his chin. "Been empty a while. You be careful out there." Jacob nodded, brushing it off as small-town nosiness, but the man's words stuck with him. That night the whispers came again, clearer now, like a voice trying to form words. Jacob sat up, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. The sound wasn't outside anymore. It was coming from the hallway just beyond his bedroom door. Jacob stood frozen in the bedroom doorway, the flashlight's beam trembling in his grip. The hallway stretched before him, narrow and dark, the weak glow from his bedside lamp barely reaching the far wall. The whispering had stopped the moment he opened the door, leaving only the creak of the cabin settling in the night. His breath caught in his throat, shallow and quick, as he swept the light across the faded wallpaper. Nothing. Just peeling paint and a warped floorboard that groaned under his weight as he stepped forward. He told himself it was the house, old wood, bad pipes, something rational, but his pulse hammered in his ears, betraying the lie. He checked every corner, every closet, even the empty bedroom down the hall. The air felt heavier here, like it was holding its breath. He shone the light under the dresser, half expecting to see eyes staring back, but there was only dust and a single rusted nail. Downstairs, the main room was just as he'd left it. His toolbox by the fireplace, a half-empty beer on the table. The front door was locked, the new deadbolt he'd installed that afternoon still shiny. He tugged at it anyway, needing the reassurance of its weight. Outside, the porch was empty, the trees silent under a sliver of moon. No wind, no owls, nothing to explain the sound that had slithered through the walls. Jacob didn't sleep after that. He sat on the couch, flashlight in one hand, a kitchen knife in the other, staring at the hallway until dawn painted the windows gray. The whispers didn't return, but the silence was worse somehow, like the house was waiting for him to let his guard down. When morning came, he was bleary-eyed, his hands stiff from gripping the knife. He made coffee, the gurgle of the pot grounding him, and stepped outside to clear his head. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. He walked the perimeter of the cabin, eyes scanning the ground for footprints, broken branches, anything. The dirt was soft from recent rain, but there were no tracks, not even his own from yesterday. It didn't make sense. He circled twice, then checked the shed out back, its padlock untouched. Inside, a few rusty tools and a stack of firewood sat undisturbed. He was alone. He had to be. Back inside, Jacob tried to focus on work. He started sanding the kitchen cabinets, the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper calming his nerves. But his eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the trees that seemed to lean closer every time he looked away. Around noon, he heard a crunch of gravel outside. His heart lurched until he saw a beat-up Chevy pulling up, an older woman behind the wheel. She climbed out, maybe 60, with gray hair tied back and a flannel shirt tucked into jeans. She carried a foil-covered dish, the kind people bring to funerals. "Name's Ruth," she called, her voice carrying a smoker's rasp. "Lived down the road. Heard someone took the Harper place." Jacob met her on the porch, forcing a smile. Ruth's eyes were sharp, sizing him up as she handed over the dish casserole still warm. She didn't ask to come in, just stood there glancing past him into the cabin. "You fixing it up?" she asked, nodding at the toolbox visible through the door. Jacob said yeah, keeping it vague. He wasn't in the mood for small talk, but Ruth lingered, her gaze flicking to the woods. "Quiet out here," she said, almost to herself. "Too quiet sometimes." Jacob nodded, waiting for her to leave, but she added, "You hear anything strange at night? Owls, coyotes, that sort of thing?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes locked onto his, searching. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to tell her about the whispers, to see if she'd laugh it off or confirm he wasn't crazy. But he barely knew her, and the last thing he needed was gossip spreading through Jasper. "Just the usual," he said, shrugging. "Wind mostly." Ruth's mouth twitched like she knew he was lying. "Will you need anything? I'm a mile east," she said, then turned back to her truck. As she drove off, Jacob caught her glancing at the cabin in her rear view, her expression unreadable. The casserole sat uneaten on the counter as Jacob worked through the afternoon, replacing a loose stair tread. Every creak of the house made him pause, listening for that breathy sound. By dusk he was exhausted, his hands raw from sanding. He ate a cold sandwich, the radio playing staticky country tunes to drown out the silence. But as night fell, the unease crept back heavier now. He locked every door, checked every window, even wedged a chair under the front door's knob. He wasn't taking chances. Around midnight he was in bed, the lamp casting long shadows across the ceiling. He'd almost convinced himself the whispers were in his head when they started again, soft, insistent, like a conversation just out of reach. This time they weren't in the hallway. They were outside, circling the cabin, moving from the front porch to the back, then to the side window. Jacob's skin prickled. He grabbed the flashlight and knife, his hands steady, despite the fear clawing at his chest. The whispers grew louder, forming syllables he couldn't quite catch, like a name repeated over and over. He crept to the living room window, peering through the blinds. The yard was empty, the trees still. But the sound was right there, inches away, separated only by glass. He backed away, the knife's handle slick with sweat. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a single sharp tap on the window. Jacob spun around, the flashlight beam darting across the room. Nothing. He waited, barely breathing, but the tap didn't come again. When he finally worked up the nerve to look outside, the yard was as empty as before. He stayed up until dawn, the radio on low, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Whatever was out there, it wasn't done with him. Jacob woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, his neck stiff from dozing on the couch. The knife lay on the coffee table, the flashlight beside it, its batteries nearly dead. He felt like he'd been hit by a truck, every muscle aching from tension. The cabin was quiet, the radio still humming faintly, but the memory of last night's tap on the window clung to him like damp clothes. He made coffee stronger this time and stepped outside to shake off the fog in his head. The morning was crisp, the Ozarks glowing gold under the rising sun, but the beauty felt hollow, like a mask hiding something rotten. He walked the yard again, slower this time, eyes scanning for anything out of place. Near the back of the cabin, where the whispers had been loudest, he noticed a patch of dirt that looked disturbed, like someone had dragged their foot through it. He crouched, tracing the edge with his fingers. It wasn't a footprint, not exactly, but it was too deliberate to be natural. A few feet away, a low branch on a pine tree was snapped, the break, fresh, the wood still green inside. Jacob's stomach twisted. He wasn't imagining things. Someone or something had been here. He spent the morning reinforcing the cabin. He nailed shut the windows in the empty bedroom, replaced the shed's rusty padlock with a heavier one, and checked the roof for loose shingles that might let someone climb up. Every hammer strike felt like a small act of defiance, a way to reclaim control. But the work didn't quiet the questions buzzing in his head. Who would come out here miles from nowhere just to mess with him? Kid's a drifter. The clerk's warning about the Harper place echoed in his mind, but he pushed it aside. He didn't have time for ghost stories. Around noon, he drove into Jasper for more supplies, batteries, a motion sensor light, and a cheap hunting knife to replace the kitchen one. The hardware store was busier. Today, locals milling about, their conversations halting when Jacob walked in. The same clerk, Ed, rang him up, his gray beard twitching as he glanced at the items. "Getting serious out there, huh?" Ed said, half smiling. Jacob nodded, keeping his answers short. As he left, he overheard two men at the counter, their voices low. "That's the guy at the Harper place," one muttered. "Hope he knows what he's in for." Jacob kept walking, his jaw tight, but the words burrowed under his skin. Back at the cabin, he installed the motion light above the porch, its stark white beam cutting through the dusk when he tested it. He felt a little safer, but not much. As evening settled, he cooked a frozen pizza, the oven's hum a small comfort. He ate at the table, the radio tuned to a talk show, the host's voice filling the silence. But his eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the black beyond the glass. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there watching, waiting for the right moment. That night he stayed downstairs, the hunting knife tucked into his belt. He left every light on the cabin glowing like a beacon in the dark. Around 11 p.m., the whispers returned, fainter this time, like they were testing him. They came from the back of the house near the shed. Jacob gripped the knife, his mouth dry. He wasn't going out there, not at night. But the sound grew insistent, weaving through the walls, forming fragments of words, his name maybe, or Clara's. He couldn't tell. He turned up the radio, but the whispers cut through, sharp and cold. Then a thud, heavy, deliberate, from the porch. Jacob's heart slammed against his ribs. He crept to the front door, the knife raised, and peered through the peephole. The motion light was on, illuminating the porch, but no one was there. Just his truck parked where he'd left it, and the trees swaying in the distance. He opened the door an inch, the cold air rushing in. Something glinted on the porch floor, a small tarnished key, its teeth worn smooth. He picked it up, his fingers trembling. It didn't look like any key he owned, but it felt heavy, like it carried a story he didn't want to know. He locked the door, wedged the chair under the knob, and sat with the key in his hand, turning it over. It was old, maybe from the cabin's early days. He tried it in the front door, the shed, even the dresser upstairs, but it didn't fit anything. By midnight, the whispers had stopped, but the key burned in his palm, a puzzle he couldn't solve. He slipped it into his pocket, vowing to ask Ruth about it tomorrow. She'd lived here long enough. Maybe she'd know something. As he lay on the couch, the knife within reach, he couldn't shake the feeling that the key was a message, a warning from whoever or whatever was out there. Jacob barely slept, the key a cold weight in his pocket. Dawn brought a gray sky, clouds heavy with the promise of rain. He made coffee, his hands moving on autopilot, but his mind was on the key and the thud that had left it on his porch. He checked the yard again, hoping for answers, but the disturbed dirt was gone, smoothed over by some unseen hand. The snapped branch was still there, though a quiet reminder he wasn't imagining things. He needed answers, and Ruth was his best bet. He drove to her place, a modest farmhouse with peeling paint and a cluttered porch. Ruth was in the garden, pulling weeds, her hands caked with dirt. She straightened when she saw him, wiping her brow. "Didn't expect you so soon," she said, her eyes narrowing at his tense expression. Jacob held up the key, explaining where he'd found it. Ruth's face tightened, her gaze flicking to the woods behind her house. "That's an old one," she said, taking it from him. "Looks like it might have been for the Harper place back when it had different locks." She paused, then added, "You should talk to Ed at the store. He knew the Harpers better than most." Jacob thanked her, unease curling in his gut. Ruth's hesitation, the way she avoided his eyes, told him she knew more than she was saying. Back at the cabin, he couldn't focus on repairs. The key sat on the table, glinting in the dim light. He decided to search the house, hoping for something, anything that might explain it. The attic was his first stop, a cramped space under the eaves accessible by a pull-down ladder. The air up there was stale thick with the smell of mold and old wood. He crawled through cobwebs, his flashlight catching stacks of boxes and broken furniture. In the far corner, half buried under a tarp, he found a small wooden chest, its lock rusted shut. The key didn't fit, but a crowbar from his toolbox did the trick. Inside were papers, faded photos, and a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. The name, Elijah Harper, was scrawled on the first page, dated 1962. Jacob's uncle had mentioned Elijah, the cabin's original owner, a reclusive man who'd lived there until his death in the 80s. Jacob sat on the attic floor, the journal open in his lap, and started reading. Elijah's entries were short, practical notes about crops, repairs, the weather. But as the years progressed, the tone shifted. By 1975, he wrote about noises in the hollow whispers that came at night, always in the fall. He described them as voices too faint to understand, circling the cabin like wolves. "They know I'm here," he wrote. "They want me gone." Jacob's mouth went dry. The entries grew erratic, mentioning a shadow in the woods, something that watched him when he worked outside. Elijah tried to ignore it, but the whispers followed him inside, seeping through the walls. One entry dated 1978 chilled Jacob to the bone. "Found a key on the porch today. Not mine. I burned it. They're closer now." Jacob closed the journal, his hands shaking. The parallels were too stark. Whispers, a key, the same damn cabin. He took the journal downstairs, spreading its pages across the table. The photos from the chest showed Elijah, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, standing alone in front of the cabin. In one, the background was blurred, but Jacob swore he saw a shape among the trees, too tall to be human. He rubbed his eyes, telling himself it was a trick of the light. But the journal's words clung to him heavy and real. That afternoon he drove back to Jasper, the journal tucked under his arm. Ed was at the hardware store sweeping the floor. When Jacob showed him the journal and mentioned the key, Ed's face paled. "Elijah was a good man," he said, his voice low. "But that land, it's got a history. Folks said he went strange, talking about voices, shadows. We thought he was losing it." Ed hesitated, then leaned closer. "After he died, the noises stopped. Until now, I guess." Jacob pressed for more, but Ed clammed up, muttering about customers waiting. Back home, Jacob couldn't shake Elijah's words. He sat with the journal, rereading entries until the words blurred. The whispers had driven Elijah to paranoia, maybe worse. Jacob wasn't there yet, but he could feel the cabin closing in, its walls too tight, its silence too loud. That night he triple-checked the locks, the motion light casting stark shadows across the yard. He kept the journal by his side, the knife in his belt. Around 1 a.m., the whispers returned louder, more distinct, chanting something he couldn't make out. They were inside now, echoing from the attic, the floorboards creaking above his head. Jacob's heart pounded as he stared at the ceiling, the attic floorboards groaning above him. The whispers were relentless now, a chorus of overlapping voices, their words just beyond comprehension. He gripped the knife, its blade catching the lamplight. The cabin felt alive, its walls pulsing with the sound. He wanted to run, to drive away, and never look back, but something held him. Stubbornness, maybe, or the need to know what was haunting him. He climbed the attic ladder, each step, creaking the air, growing colder as he ascended. The whispers stopped when he reached the top, the silence so abrupt it felt like a slap. The chest lay open, its contents untouched, but the tarp in the corner was bunched up like someone had moved it. Jacob's flashlight swept the space, finding nothing but shadows. Back downstairs, he couldn't sit still. He paced the living room, the journal open on the table, Elijah's words taunting him. He needed to do something, anything, to break the cycle. He grabbed a hammer and nails, deciding to board up the attic hatch. If the whispers were coming from there, he'd seal them off. The work was sloppy, his hands shaking, but the physical act grounded him. When he finished, the hatch was a patchwork of planks, ugly but solid. He stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, and for a moment the cabin felt his again, but the relief was short-lived. Around 2 a.m., a new sound cut through the silence, a soft scratch like fingernails on glass. It came from the kitchen window. Jacob froze, the hammer still in his hand. The motion light outside was off the yard, swallowed by darkness. He crept to the window, pulling the curtain aside an inch. A face stared back, pale, gaunt, its eyes black pits that seemed to swallow the light. It was there for a split second, then gone, leaving only the reflection of his own terrified face. Jacob stumbled back, the hammer slipping from his grip. He checked the window, the lock secure, no smudges or marks on the glass. But he'd seen it. He knew he had. He didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the wall, the knife in one hand, the hammer in the other, every creak of the house sending his pulse racing. Dawn brought no comfort, only a dull ache in his chest. He drove to Ruth's again, desperate for answers. She was in her kitchen brewing tea, her face tightening when she saw the journal in his hands. "You found Elijah's things," she said, not a question. Jacob told her everything, the whispers, the key, the face. Ruth listened, her hands clasped tight around her mug. "There's stories about that land," she said finally. "Old ones. Folks said the hollow was cursed, that something lives there, something that don't like company." She wouldn't meet his eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elijah thought it was just a person at first. Then he stopped talking about it." Jacob pressed her, but Ruth shook her head. "Talk to Pastor Warren," she said. "He's been here longer than me. He might know more." Jacob left, frustration burning in his chest. He didn't believe in curses, but the face at the window wasn't human, not entirely. He found Pastor Warren at the small church in Jasper, a wiry man in his 70s with deep-set eyes. The pastor listened as Jacob recounted the events, his expression unreadable. "The hollow's always been strange," Warren said. "Elijah came to me once, scared out of his mind. Said he saw something in the woods, something that knew his name." Warren paused, choosing his words. "I told him to pray, but some things don't listen to prayers." Jacob drove back the pastor's words looping in his head. He didn't pray, hadn't since Clara died. But he needed to do something. That afternoon he searched the property again, this time venturing into the woods. The trees were dense, their branches knitting together to block the sun. He found a clearing a quarter-mile from the cabin, a circle of bare earth where nothing grew. In the center was a pile of stones, weathered and moss-covered, arranged in a rough spiral. It didn't look natural. He knelt, brushing dirt from the stones, and found scratches etched into one, initials maybe, or symbols worn by time. The air felt wrong here too, still like the forest was holding its breath. He backed away, his skin crawling, and hurried back to the cabin. That night he stayed up, the knife and hammer within reach. The whispers didn't come, but the silence was oppressive, pressing against his eardrums. Around 3 a.m., the motion light snapped on, flooding the porch with light. Jacob peered through the blinds, his breath hitching. The yard was empty, but the shed door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. He'd locked it that morning. He was sure of it. Jacob stared at the open shed door, the motion light casting long shadows across the yard. His first instinct was to grab the knife and check, but the memory of the face at the window stopped him. He wasn't going out there, not in the dark. He double-checked the cabin's locks, his hands clumsy with adrenaline, and sat with his back to the wall, watching the windows until dawn. When morning came, he approached the shed cautiously, the new padlock dangling uselessly, its hasp pried open. Inside, the tools were untouched, but a stack of firewood had been toppled, the logs scattered like someone had been searching for something. Jacob's throat tightened. He replaced the padlock, his hands steadier now, but the violation lingered, a reminder that the cabin wasn't his sanctuary anymore. He needed answers not just about the shed, but the stones, the journal, everything. He drove to Jasper seeking Pastor Warren again. The church was empty, but he found the pastor in the graveyard out back tending to a weathered headstone. Warren looked up, his eyes weary. Jacob didn't waste time describing the shed, the clearing, the spiral of stones. The pastor's face darkened. "That clearing's old," he said, brushing dirt from his hands. "Older than the town. Folks used to say it was a meeting place back before the settlers came. Not for people, though." He hesitated, then added, "Elijah found it too. Said it felt like the heart of the hollow." After that, he stopped coming to church. Jacob pressed for more, but Warren only shook his head. "Leave it be, son," he said. "Some things are better left buried." Frustrated, Jacob headed to the diner across the street, hoping to overhear something useful. The place was half full. Locals sipping coffee, their conversations hushed. He sat at the counter nursing a Coke and caught snippets of talk: weather crops, a missing dog. Then an older man in a trucker hat leaned toward his friend, voice low. "Heard the Harper place is active again. Poor bastard living there now." His friend nodded, glancing at Jacob. "Hope he's got a gun." Jacob kept his eyes on his glass, but his pulse quickened. The town knew something, and they weren't telling him. Back at the cabin, he couldn't settle. He walked the property, avoiding the woods, and noticed a faint trail leading from the shed to the tree line. It was barely there, a few crushed leaves and bent grass, but it was fresh. He followed it a few yards, then stopped, the clearing stones flashing in his mind. He wasn't ready to go back there, not yet. Instead, he spent the afternoon reinforcing the shed, adding a second lock, and nailing a board across the door. The work felt futile, but it was better than sitting still. By evening, rain had started, a steady drizzle that turned the yard to mud. He stayed inside, the radio on low, Elijah's journal open on the table. He'd marked the pages about the clearing, the shadow, the key. One entry stood out, written in a shaky hand. "It knows my name. It wants the house." That night, Jacob slept downstairs, the knife tucked under his pillow. The rain drummed on the roof, masking smaller sounds, but he woke around 2 a.m. to a new noise, a low hum like a voice caught in a loop. It came from the fireplace, the stone amplifying the sound. He sat up, the knife in his hand, and crept closer. The hum grew clearer, forming syllables, a name: Clara's. His chest tightened, grief and fear twisting together. He tore the fireplace screen aside, shining his flashlight into the chimney. Nothing but soot and cobwebs. The hum stopped, replaced by a faint laugh, sharp and cold, echoing from the walls. Jacob backed away, his hands trembling. It wasn't Clara. It couldn't be. He stayed awake, the knife never leaving his grip. At dawn, he checked the fireplace again, finding a small charred bone wedged in the flue. It was too small to be human, maybe a bird's, but its presence felt deliberate, like another message. He wrapped it in a cloth, unsure what to do with it, and drove to Ruth's. She was on her porch, rocking in a chair, her eyes sharp as ever. When he showed her the bone, she went still. "You need to leave that place," she said. Her voice flat. "It's not just stories. The hollow takes what it wants." She wouldn't say more, only handed him a small cross pendant, the kind you'd find in a thrift store. "Keep it on you," she said. Jacob took it more to humor her than anything, but its weight in his pocket felt heavier than it should. The rain didn't let up, turning the Ozarks into a sea of mud and mist. Jacob drove back from Ruth's, the cross pendant swinging from his rearview mirror. He didn't believe in charms, but he wasn't about to tempt fate. The cabin loomed ahead, its logs slick with rain, the motion light flickering as he pulled up. Inside, the air was damp, the smell of mildew stronger now. He checked the fireplace, the bone still wrapped in cloth on the table, its presence a quiet accusation. He couldn't stay here much longer, not like this, but leaving felt like admitting defeat. Clara would have told him to fight to figure it out. He owed her that much. He spent the day cleaning, scrubbing the floors, wiping down walls, anything to keep his hands busy. But the cabin fought back. Every surface seemed to hold a memory of Elijah's fear etched into the grain of the wood. He found a loose floorboard in the hallway, prying it up to reveal a small hollow. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with twine, the paper brittle. They were from Elijah to a woman named Margaret, dated 1970s. Most were mundane talk of the weather, the cabin, but the last one was different. "I can't stay," Elijah wrote. "It's in the house now. I'm sorry." Jacob's hands shook as he read the words, too close to his own thoughts. That evening the power flickered, the lights dimming before surging back. Jacob checked the breaker box, finding nothing wrong, but the unease grew. He cooked a can of soup, the gas stove hissing, and ate in silence, the radio dead from a weak signal. Around 9 p.m., the power cut out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. The motion light outside stayed off, its battery backup useless. Jacob fumbled for his flashlight, its beam weak from overuse. The silence was total, the rain stopping abruptly, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves. He lit a candle, its flame trembling in the draft, and sat with the knife, the letters spread before him. Then a knock, slow, deliberate, from the front door. Jacob's breath caught. He gripped the knife, creeping to the peephole. The porch was black, the candle's light too weak to reach. Another knock, heavier this time, followed by a low scrape, like something dragging across the wood. He backed away, his heart pounding, and checked the windows, the blinds drawn tight. The knock stopped, replaced by footsteps, heavy, uneven, circling the cabin. Jacob followed the sound, moving from window to window, but saw nothing. The footsteps paused at the back door, then a voice, soft, almost sing-song, called his name. Jacob. It wasn't Clara's voice, but it carried her cadence, her warmth. He clamped a hand over his mouth, stifling a sob. The voice called again, closer now, from the kitchen. Jacob spun the flashlight beam, darting across the room. The back door was locked, the chair still wedged under the knob, but the voice was inside, echoing from the walls. He shouted, "Get out!" His voice cracking, but the only response was a low laugh, the same one from the fireplace. The candle flickered its flame, bending toward the hallway. Jacob followed the knife, raised the cross pendant, heavy in his pocket. The hallway was empty, but the attic hatch, nailed shut, rattled like something was pushing from the other side. Dust sifted down, coating his shoulders. He backed away, the flashlight flickering, then dying completely. He relit the candle, its light barely enough to see. The rattling stopped, but the air grew colder, his breath visible in the glow. He retreated to the living room, piling furniture against the hallway door, chairs, a table, anything he could move. The voice called again from the chimney now, Clara's name woven into the whispers. Jacob's knees buckled, grief tearing through him. He clutched the pendant, its edges biting into his palm, and whispered Clara's name, a plea or a prayer, he wasn't sure. The whispers stopped, the house falling silent, but the darkness felt heavier, like it was watching. When dawn broke, the power was still out. Jacob checked the attic hatch, the nails intact, no sign of tampering. But the letters on the table were gone, the twine left behind neatly coiled. He didn't know how or why, but the cabin was playing with him, bending reality to keep him off balance. Jacob stood in the living room, staring at the coiled twine where the letters had been. The cabin was mocking him, stealing pieces of his sanity one by one. The power was still out, the morning light, gray and weak through the windows. He checked the breaker box again, flipping switches to no avail. The bone from the fireplace was still there, wrapped in cloth, its presence a quiet threat. He needed to know what was happening, even if it broke him. The clearing in the woods, the stones, Elijah's journal pointed there, and Jacob couldn't ignore it anymore. He grabbed a shovel from the shed, the new locks holding firm, and headed into the forest. The trail to the clearing was clearer now, the crushed leaves more pronounced, like someone had walked it recently. The air grew colder as he approached the trees, thinning to reveal the barren circle of earth. The stones were unchanged, their spiral tighter than he'd remembered the etched symbols, sharper in the daylight. He knelt, brushing dirt from one, and felt a faint vibration, like a pulse under the ground. His skin prickled, but he started digging the shovel, biting into the soft earth. He didn't know what he was looking for, answers proof anything to make sense of the madness. The hole grew deeper, his arms burning from the effort. At 3 feet, the shovel hit something hard. He cleared the dirt, revealing a wooden trapdoor, its edges rotted but intact. A rusted padlock held it shut, the keyhole too small for the key from the porch. Jacob pried at the lock with the shovel, the metal groaning before snapping. He lifted the trapdoor, a wave of cold, damp air, rushing up, smelling of earth and decay. Stone steps descended into darkness, their edges worn smooth. He hesitated, the pendant heavy in his pocket, then grabbed his flashlight, recharged now, and started down. The tunnel was narrow, the walls rough-hewn, glistening with moisture. The flashlight beam danced across roots, twisting through the stone like veins in a living thing. The air grew thicker, pressing against his chest. After 20 steps, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, its floor packed dirt, its walls carved with symbols like those on the stones above. In the center was a crude altar, a flat slab of rock stained dark, surrounded by small bones. Birds, rodents, maybe more. Jacob's stomach churned. This wasn't a cellar. It was something older, something wrong. He approached the altar, the flashlight catching a glint of metal. A locket, tarnished but intact, lay among the bones. He picked it up, its chain cold against his skin. Inside was a faded photo of a woman, her face eerily similar to Clara's. The name Margaret was scratched on the back, the same Margaret from Elijah's letters. Jacob's hands shook. This was no coincidence. The cabin, the hollow, the whispers, they were tied to her, to Elijah, to him. He pocketed the locket, his mind racing, and turned to leave. But the flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering. A whisper filled the chamber, not from the walls, but from inside his head, chanting Clara's name. He stumbled back, the locket burning in his pocket. The air grew heavy, the symbols on the walls glowing faintly, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He ran the steps, slick under his boots, and burst into the clearing, gasping for air. The trapdoor slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the trees. He filled the hole, shoveling dirt, until his hands blistered, burying the tunnel like it could erase what he'd seen. Back at the cabin, he locked the locket in the chest, with Elijah's journal, vowing not to touch it again. That night the whispers were louder, angrier, rattling the windows. Jacob sat with the knife, the pendant around his neck, the locket's weight lingering in his mind. Around midnight the motion light snapped on, and a shadow moved across the porch. Not a person, but something taller, its edges blurred. Jacob didn't look. He couldn't. He clutched the pendant, whispering Clara's name, and waited for dawn. Jacob didn't sleep, his eyes fixed on the porch, until the shadow vanished with the first light of dawn. The cabin was a prison now, its walls closing in the whispers, a constant hum in his ears. The locket, the tunnel, Margaret's face. They were pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to solve, but he couldn't ignore them. He needed to end this one way or another. He packed a bag, clothes, tools, the journal, ready to leave if it came to that. But first he'd face the hollow, whatever it was. Clara's memory deserved that much. He drove to Jasper, seeking Pastor Warren one last time. The pastor was in the church, polishing pews, his hands steady despite his age. Jacob laid it all out, the tunnel, the altar, the locket. Warren listened, his face grim. Margaret was Elijah's sister, he said finally. She disappeared in 75 right after those whispers started. Folks thought she ran off, but Elijah, he believed something took her. He spent years looking, digging, talking to that hollow like it could answer. Warren paused, his eyes distant. Whatever's down there, it's not just a story. It's hungry. Jacob didn't want to believe it, but the locket burned in his pocket. Margaret's face too close to Clara's. He asked Warren what to do. The pastor shook his head. Burn the place down if you can. Or run and don't look back. Jacob thanked him, his mind made up. Burning the cabin felt too final, too much like giving up. He'd try one last thing, confront the hollow, seal the tunnel for good, and hope it was enough. Back at the cabin, he gathered supplies, gasoline, matches, the shovel. He walked to the clearing, the air colder now, the trees silent. The stones seemed to watch him as he dug, unearthing the trapdoor. He poured gasoline down the steps, the fumes stinging his eyes, and lit a match. The flames roared, black smoke curling into the sky. He watched until the fire died, the trapdoor charred but intact. It wasn't enough. He knew it. The whispers were still there, fainter, but persistent, calling from the cabin now. That night he stayed inside the bag, packed the knife in his hand. The whispers grew louder, the walls shaking, Clara's name woven into the sound. Around 1 a.m., the door rattled, not locked anymore, despite the chair wedged against it. Jacob stood, the pendant around his neck, the locket in his fist. The shadow was back, taller now, filling the doorway. Its eyes were black, its mouth a slash of darkness, whispering his name. He shouted, "Leave me alone," and threw the locket at it. The shadow flinched, the locket passing through it, clattering to the floor. The whispers stopped, the shadow dissolving into the dark. Jacob grabbed his bag and ran the cabin's walls, groaning behind him. He drove, not stopping, until Jasper was a speck in his rear view. He didn't know if the hollow was done with him, but he wasn't going back. The pendant stayed around his neck, the journal in his bag, a reminder of what he'd survived. He settled in Little Rock again, the city's noise a comfort after the hollow's silence. The whispers never followed, but sometimes in the quiet of night, he'd hear Clara's name faint and far away. That's the end of Ichu. The Hollow's Whisper. Thanks for sticking with me through this one, folks. It's a story that lingers, doesn't it? If you enjoyed it, let me know, and maybe we'll dive into another tale soon. Stay safe out there, and I'll catch you next time.